We will do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation. We ask that everyone be patient as we navigate this together for the first time. We have two formats for participation, the first being the Zoom web application as well as teleconference. Before we begin, I want to review some guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. Very important, so I ask that you pay close attention. Please silence your other communication devices such as your cell or desk phone. This will ensure that we are not hearing any feedback or causing interruption during the meeting. During the meeting, all participants on Zoom, including committee members, with the exception of the chair and certain South Coast AQMD staff, will be placed on mute by the host. That means that you will not be able to mute or unmute your lines manually. Committee members that wish to be recognized to speak will be unmuted when they click on the gray raised hand button. After each agenda item, the chair will announce public comments. For the Zoom video instructions, for those of you using Zoom, if you would like to make a public comment on the Zoom screen, please click on Participants button on the bottom of your screen. A list of participants will appear on the right side of the screen, and at the button on the list, please click on the gray raise hand button. This will signal to the host you would like to provide public comment, and you will be added to the list. If you're using Zoom on your smartphone, a new screen will pop up with a list of participants. Look for the raised hand button on the screen. For those of you calling in on the phone line only, you can dial *9 on your keypad to signal that you would like to comment. Your name will be called when it's your turn to comment, and the host will unmute your line automatically. Please note, you can hang up or leave the Zoom meeting at any time. We also ask you to please adhere to the speaker time limit. Please treat others with courtesy and civility and respect the public meeting process. Rules prohibiting the use of signs or posters remain in effect for video participation. Profanity, discriminatory comments, or obscene gestures are prohibited. Disorderly, unruly, or aggressive behavior that infringes upon the rights of others or disrupts the good working order of the meeting is also prohibited. Any violation of the above rules can result in your mic being muted, your video feed being shut off, or you being dropped from the phone or Zoom meetings. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Derek. And I will call the meeting to order. This is the Legislative Committee meeting on April 10th. And thank you all for attending. We hope you are all healthy and safe and stay that way. So let's begin. We will have our update on both federal and California issues, and then we will have an update from Derek on our voting district authorization for clean air. So we will start with an update from Mark Kadish. I believe Mark is somewhere on the line. I don't see him on my screen, but Mark, would you go ahead and give us an update on your written report? Thank you.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, may I suggest a roll call at the start?
Yes, of course. Yes, maybe have a roll call, please.
Dr. Burke?
Yes.
Councilmember Buscaino? Senator Delgado?
Present.
Supervisor Perez? Supervisor Rutherford?
Present.
Councilmember Mitchell?
Present. Okay, so we have Supervisor Perez and Councilmember Buscaino are not with us at this time, so we can assume that we still have a quorum. We can go ahead with regular business. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead with the federal update, and this is from Kadish and Associates, and I believe Mark Kadish is on the line. No? Okay, we can come back to Kadish and Associates, and we'll move on to Carmen Group. I did see Gary Hoitzma, in my Zoom screen, so I believe Gary will have the report from Carmen Group. Go ahead, Gary.
Joe Buscaino's on the line, if you can hear me. I was muted.
Oh, okay. Yes, we can hear you now, Joe.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. This is Gary. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can. Can all of you hear?
Yes, appreciate it. Well, I just want to focus on the coronavirus crisis in Washington. That's the big thing that we're dealing with right now. The whole month of March has been taken up with these three major pieces of federal legislation responding to the crisis. And your federal consulting team has been working together as a team here. And I think Mark was going to just outline the overview of how we're looking to try to get AQMD positioned for federal benefits in this as we go forward. And as we've been working, each one of us has our little roles to play. And of course, Carmen Group is focused on the federal government side of it, the administration side of it. So we're looking constantly at what we can do to help with the White House, with the administration, with the federal agencies that are involved, that sort of thing. And so we're working closely with staff in working on what we need. Now, as you see in the latest state of play is that the Congress is looking to do what we're calling a COVID-3 or COVID 3.5 bill, and maybe a COVID 4 bill coming up here soon. So we're going to be actively engaged trying to get AQMD positioned to get direct grant money from some of these benefits that are going out around the country. So we're working on that, trying to look for eligibilities in the various programs that are out there and that sort of thing. In the run up to the COVID-3 bill here a week or so ago, our firm was actively engaged in working with the Vice President's office and others. So we're going to be looking at that going forward. We see infrastructure as a big issue going forward. We're working closely with Congress on the infrastructure bills that they're working on that might be part of this new bill. So we're working on that too. So I'll just end it there and go from there. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Gary. I do have one to start, and that is with respect to the infrastructure. Are we looking at EV infrastructure? Can you describe that a little bit more for
Yeah, well, that's going to be a contentious issue as we go forward. The president has said he doesn't want the Green New Deal as part of this, but at the same time, Republicans and Democrats both have agreed to EV-related issues, infrastructure, and that sort of thing in the bill that the president endorsed, the Barrasso bill in the Senate. So that is the potential starting point for where we can absolutely look for some infrastructure evolving around EVs and that sort of thing. So I see that as a very real possibility, and we've got to just be vigilant in pushing for it.
Great, thank you.
Madam Chair,
To my committee members, any questions?
How about hydrogen?
Dr. Burke?
How about hydrogen?
Yes, that's part of what's in the Senate bill right now. In the Senate bill, that the Barrasso bill is what we call, has been approved by the Senate committee. And it's sort of the starting point, I think, for the Senate Republicans and what they advocate for. And the infrastructure that they're talking about would include hydrogen as well, yes.
Great, thank you for that question also. Any other questions?
Madam Chair?
Yes. Who's speaking?
Madam Chair, this is Supervisor Perez. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Oh, thank you. You're on the line. We missed you for the roll call. Welcome.
No, I was on. I just couldn't figure it out, but I just wanted to just let you know that I'm present. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We're all figuring it out. Go ahead. Do you have a question?
No, I just wanted to make sure that I'm present.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor. Any questions from any committee members?
Madam Chair, I was just wondering how likely it is for us to be able to get some of that funding given where the president's stance is on air quality environmental issues.
Thank you. Question from Senator Delgado. Can I
Well,
do that?
The way we have to look at it is whatever the president wants is one thing, but he has to compromise with Democrats on the Hill. And so you're going to see a give and take on a lot of these things. The Republicans may not support certain things, but the Democrats do. And so there's going to be a balancing act going on. And the Democrats, particularly in the AQMD delegation, are going to be very active, insisting on certain things that they need, that they want. And that's where our focus is going to be. And I think there's a real possibility, as I look at it, that yes, there's going to be things in there that will help air quality and may not be the things that the president would necessarily want, but they're going to be things he's going to have to agree to.
Okay. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have a question? Yes, Derek.
Yeah, Madam Chair, just want to let you know, Mark Kadish is on the line. We did
Okay.
unmute him, but additionally, just want to remind everyone that if you do want to speak, especially for the folks who are on the using the phone, make sure you press *9. Thank you.
Okay, I see Mark Kadish is on the line here.
Yes,
And
good morning, Madam Chair.
good morning, Mark.
Would you like me to
Thank you
proceed?
for joining us. Can you go ahead and give us an update on your report?
I can, and I'm glad to hear that Supervisor Perez had the same problem I did, so I'm not the only one that can't figure this out. I appreciate it. I just want to give, in addition to our report, the provision. We included a lot of the provisions of the CARES Act, but I'd like to give you one area where we in the team focused under the direction of Wayne Nastry and his team. The Kadish, Cassidy, and Carmen firms worked together as a group to ensure eligibility for South Coast under the relief provisions of the Act for state and local government. Each of the firms, kind of working in coordination with Wayne's team, focused on different areas in government. Gary just talked about his effort with the administration, the Vice President's office. We in the Carmen group, we in Cassidy focused on the Senate and House leadership offices. And ultimately in that bill, we were successful in including language in the stabilization fund provision, which enables, quote, subdivisions of the state that technically include South Coast to participate in loan programs. And those loan programs are designed to provide funding for any losses that result from the impacts of the COVID pandemic. These aren't grants at this point, but that definition is a crucial first step for us in making sure that we're included in funding for state and local agencies who are suffering a lot. And the good news is that Speaker Pelosi, one of the arguments we're having now is trying to include more funding and more grant funding for state and local entities in the next bill that they're currently negotiating. So that was the work we did in what they're calling the COVID Relief 3 bill. They're now working on what they call the COVID 3.5, which is adding money to the Small Business Administration program that I'm sure you've heard about, another $250 billion. Pelosi and Democrats are holding that up slightly because they are insisting on money for state and local governments, hospitals, and other items that are important. And we hope to have that and expect to have that resolved in a fairly short order next week, although one never knows. After that, we've already talking, the speaker's already talking about another $1 trillion or more package known as the COVID 4 relief bill. And that will likely focus on additional recovery and potentially stimulus, which we will not only include some of the programs that are we get appropriated that are important to us, but also likely in the future transportation and infrastructure items, as Gary Hoytsma just mentioned. And this is an area where we think we can have potentially, we're working federally with the other organizations to make sure that we're included and can benefit from that sort of funding. To that end, Executive Officer Nastri has brought together the largest air agencies in the state, including, in addition to us, South Coast, obviously, Bay Area, San Joaquin, and Sacramento, to join in a joint letter advocating to our entire California delegation, of which these groups represent well over 70%, that we need to, what we would like to see in the next round of bills. Among those things that we are advocating for to the delegation are additional funding, $1 billion for DERA, additional money for targeted airshed grants, alternative fueling infrastructure, and wildfire and smoke relief. We expect that that letter will be signed by the 4 agencies, ready to be signed by the 4 agencies and sent out to our entire delegation next week. So that will be all of your teams here in Washington will be focused on getting those letters out and then advocating for the funding that we're advocating for in the letters. I'd also like to point out just briefly, some of you may have seen it, the Harvard School of Public Health study, which was just put out, that established a clear link for the first time between long-term exposure to air pollution and COVID-19 death rates. It kind of, it's a terrible thing. What it does remind, I think, policymakers of seeing the study, which was reported widely in the New York Times and others, and we have sent around to all of the California offices. It reminds policymakers of the centrality of our mission and the long-term impacts of air quality and its how it's related to this pandemic. So at that I'll stop and take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mark. Very, very good report. Very interesting developments coming out of this pandemic. Questions for Mark? Anyone?
Madam Chairman, may I ask if the Harvard study breaks it down into ethnicities,
Breaks it down into?
ethnic groups?
I did not. It did it by counties, so I did not see anything by. But I read the summary of the report, and I'll have to see if there are additional appendices. But I'll check that and get you a copy, Dr. Burke.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, seeing no additional questions, we will move on to the report from Cassidy and Associates. And I see Amelia Jenkins is with us this morning. Good morning, Amelia.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm joined today with Jed Dearborn. He's our latest addition to the Cassidy family. He came straight off the Hill, and after our brief report, I'll turn to him to give a brief introduction of himself. I think Gary and Mark covered the work that we've been doing pretty well. I'll just put a little additional color on that. As staff is putting together these bills in Washington, obviously they're doing it like we are from home and without sort of the history and practice of working at home. And as a result, they're not thinking with the granularity that we approach the problem of South Coast. And following the enactment of CARES, the first version of CARES, we went back to the Energy and Commerce staff and said, it's great that we have subdivision of states as a definition here, but as you move forward, let's keep in mind that you have these air quality management districts that are under a federal requirement, yet you're not calling them out specifically as local government entities, and we can't rely on the state to pass through the funding. And it was a really good reminder to them that they need to think more granularly about state and local governments. And I think we had good uptake from staff on that. We'll continue to follow up. Obviously, the Passover holidays have have come into play here, but we are continuing to work. We will continue to work with Leader McConnell's office, which we did with the previous CARES Act bill, and then the House Democratic staff. And, you know, continue to remind them that you're losing revenue, yet you're still expected to uphold the Clean Air Act. So with that, let me just turn to Jed real quick so he can briefly introduce himself, and then we'd love to have any questions that you might have.
Good morning, Jed. Welcome to the team. So nice to meet you, even at a distance. Go
Yes,
ahead.
nice to meet everybody over Zoom. As Amelia said, my name is Jed Dearborn. I started with Cassidy last Monday. Prior to that, I was with the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee under Chairman Murkowski. And before that position, I was with Senator John Barrasso as his Energy Counsel, handling issues before the Environment and Public Works Committee and the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. And both of these positions were subsequent to several years I did at a law firm practicing energy regulatory law before state courts, federal courts, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So I'm really excited to be working with you all, and nice to meet everybody.
Great, good. With your connections to Senator Barrasso, we hope we can work through that infrastructure bill. So get some good things going. Thank you very much. Let me ask Bay and Barbara, should I ask for public comment now following the federal report, or do we just move on? Clue me in on this.
Look at the agenda. I would say, I'm trying to find my copy of the agenda.
It doesn't say anything on the agenda.
Are they separate, or usually the state and federal are separate?
They're separate, yeah. We finished the update on federal issues, so we could ask for public comment now, and then after the state issues, ask for public comment then. Would that be correct?
We could do that, or yeah, I think that's the cleanest way to do it.
All right. So I will ask now if anyone has any public comment on the federal updates that we've just heard. Then you need to press your button that raises your hand if you want to speak.
Ron, do you see any?
No public comment. If anybody's on the phone, you would press *9 if you wish to speak. Madam Chair, there's no public comment.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the state legislative issues. And we have reports first from Gonzalez and Sons. I believe Jason Gonzalez will give us that report. Good morning, Jason.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. You have Jason Gonzalez, and just a couple of quick additions to the written report we provided. I was going to give an update on the ever-changing legislative calendar given the unprecedented COVID-19 circumstances, as well as the possibility of a special or extraordinary session once the legislature returns. As you likely know, the legislature on March 16th adjourned. It was an unprecedented adjournment as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, as well as they did pass $1 billion for the governor to utilize and has been utilizing as part of executive orders and the like. The intent was to come back on April 13th. That date has now been pushed to May 4th, and we are hearing rumblings that May 4th may get pushed out even further, just depending on how the crisis unfolds. The pro tem and the speaker did announce late yesterday afternoon that they are going to finalize preparations for some for some special budget subcommittee hearings. The members will still stay on recess, but to provide some oversight on spending and how the governor and the legislature continue to grapple with the crisis. The Senate has indicated next Thursday, the 16th, the subcommittee, which will be chaired by Senator Holly Mitchell, will meet at 2 p.m. How they handle the social distancing and public participation is still yet to be determined. There's even been talk of possible Zoom meetings and whether or not that would fit into the Constitution. Given the legislative calendar, you have May revised, June 15th, budget adoption, deadlines for amendments have passed for spot bills. The Senate has been processing amendments. The Assembly has a couple hundred bills sitting at the desk with amendments that have yet to be processed. So what level of ordinary legislative session they return to is yet to be determined once they do return. But the likelihood of an extraordinary session is becoming increasingly likely, particularly because the state income tax filing has been extended to July 15th, which means the state will adopt a June 15th budget. And I know David's going to get into the budget, so I won't go too deep into the budget, but by way of process, the state will adopt a June 15th budget. With July 15th tax receipts, we really won't have revenue projections until August, September at the earliest. Sine die is August 31st for the ordinary session, which could likely lay the framework for the need of an extraordinary session post August 31st for COVID as well as then obviously you have an election year that always brings about normalcy in these type of processes, as well as conventions and the like. So how the remaining portion of the legislative year shapes out is still rather fluid, but things are pointing towards what could be a legislative session past August 31st. With that, I'll stop there and be happy to answer any questions and hope everyone stays safe and healthy.
Thank you, Jason. Any questions for Jason?
Yeah, how do they have a legislative session and maintain appropriate distancing?
Dr. Burke, that's the question they're trying to understand or grapple with, if you will, because now I guess they'll have 6 feet apart on the dais, but the subcommittee will fill up the 4203 dais in a hurry. So whether or not they can constitutionally use Zoom or other platforms, there's differing opinions, but they're trying to work through what the details will be. The announcement of the special subcommittee on the budget came late yesterday afternoon, and they're trying to provide some oversight because right now it's all being done through the governor's executive orders and his office.
So do they think that the rainy day fund will fulfill the needs of the budget with the non-collection of income taxes?
They anticipate the rainy day fund will bridge some of that gap. What I think, and again, I don't want to get too far in front of David because I think he's doing a budget update, but what we anticipate is the June 15th budget will be a skeleton budget for essential services, and then they'll have to come back sometime thereafter once they know what tax receipts look like post July 15th and actually determine which programs get funded at which levels. So I think we'll see a minimal budget, and the governor has said the $222 billion budget he released in January is going to be the budget that gets adopted will be very different.
Well, the question then becomes, where are we in the process?
Well, I think with Dr. Burke, with your team, we will be actively involved in that process, depending on how the public input participation is provided for. But there's always the behind the scenes communications and advocacy efforts, and the bulk of the legislative staff is working remotely, as most of us are. So the world has turned to conference calls and text messages and all these things that it's not the day in and day out walking the hallways, but we will actively be involved is the short answer.
But it's obvious that we have a large payroll at our agency, and if the cash isn't here, how do we pay our people?
And Dr. Burke, that's a great question. There's going to be some type of, or at least we expect there will be some type of COVID-19 relief package that I think the district, local governments, cities, counties, tribal governments, transit agencies, a number of folks have been submitting the hardship claims, if you will, to the governor's office, and it will definitely be part of some COVID-19 relief packages what I would expect will make a.
Have we been doing that, Wayne?
Yes, we've actually been pretty aggressive in our outreach to the governor's office, to Cal EPA, and then obviously working with Jason, Will, and David and others to make sure that our concerns are being addressed. You know, I would say thus far we've been successful with regards to helping frame some of the governor's executive orders to have meetings such as this. But the budget is an issue that we're very focused on. And Dr. Burke, you know, part of what we're talking about with regards to the budget, we're also looking at some of the other programs like AB 617 and how you are actually sort of getting at the racial disparity issue, which is becoming much more evident with all the COVID-19 cases coming about. We want to make sure that the governor is aware that this program shouldn't be cut. So we're working behind the scenes, talking with people and doing all the things that we would normally do. It's just that the process has slowed down, but we're still engaged very heavily.
Have you gotten any feedback?
Well, we submitted some information regarding a couple of ideas that we had discussed in the past. One was the voter district authorization, and that went to one of the agency secretaries. And I haven't had a chance to talk to him this week, but hopefully I'll get a chance, if not today, early next week, and find out.
Okay. And Ron, don't be touching your face, even though you have on those rubber gloves. Okay.
You got it.
Thank you. Thank you for that advice, Dr. Burke. Any other questions to Jason? Seeing none, we'll move on. I believe David Quintana is on the phone now. And David, your firm has a new name?
Yeah. Yes. Resolute. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I do have a couple of items that I need to add to my written report. And if it's fine with the board, I'd like to break them up into two parts. They're both budget related. The first would be just more structural, and that is on April 6th, Assembly Budget Leader Phil Ting sent out a letter, and Dr. Burke, I think this will kind of address some of the issues that you were bringing up. And in that letter, he kind of laid out a roadmap for the members on what the budget will look like this year. And in that, as Jason mentioned, on the June 15th budget that they will pass, which they have to do constitutionally, it's pretty much going to be a baseline and a service level budget. So essentially, it will be what do we need to pay the bills and keep the lights on budget. Usually there is a May revise, but I think instead of a May revise based upon revenue, since there probably will be a huge drop in revenues, as Dr. Burke mentioned, what we're going to look at, as he laid out in his letter, is an August revise. So after the July 15th receipts are in, they're going to look back in August and see, and they think that at that point they'll have a more realistic picture of what the revenues to the state will be, and then they will be able to kind of flush out I use the word robust in quotes here, a more robust budget rather than the June 15th skeletal budget. He did also point out that there's likely to be sizable reductions in ongoing programs, but they did point out three, and that members' priorities are going to have to take a back seat this year. He did point out three priorities, though, that I believe kind of puts them in we're still going to be looking at these as priorities for the body. And those are COVID response, of course, homelessness, and wildfire prevention. Those were three exceptions that he said that will still be very important to the body and to the state to pursue. And they did mention the GGRF funding in particular. It was they specifically stated that special fund programs such as the GGRF, those are going to be looked at after June 15th. So I think for the GGRF funding, how those programs will be funded, they're going to wait until after June 15th to take a look at that. So that is the letter that Budget Chairman Phil Ting, Assembly Budget Chair Phil Ting sent out on April 6th, which laid out the roadmap for the budget as we move forward into this year. The second issue that I'd like to go in right now is kind of some of the pushback that I think we're seeing happen between the legislature and the governor. As I think, as Jason mentioned, there's now going to be a subcommittee created in the Senate. On April 9th, Senate Budget Chairwoman Holly Mitchell sent a letter to the governor. As Jason referenced, on March 26th, before the legislature recessed, they did pass a bill to allow the state to attack and respond to COVID, which allowed the governor to access $500 million up to $1 billion in $50 million increments. But it also required a 72-hour notice for them to look at expenditures and et cetera. Well, I think that the Senate, based upon Senator Mitchell's letter of April 9th, is a little concerned that there has not been a lot of transparency there. There are some articles that have been published in the last 24 hours that you might want to look at, where legislators are now saying, hey, we haven't been told what the exact expenditures have been on. So Senator Mitchell came out with that letter on April 9th, stating that she'd like to see a website set up so they can track the expenditures, et cetera. On April 10th, yesterday, Senator Atkins sent out a letter in which she is creating a subcommittee that is going to look at the state's COVID response expenditures. And so that first hearing is going to be on April 16th at 2 o'clock. And this is what they're going to look at. And so we'll see how that goes. But anyway, those are just some of the updates I wanted to put in that have been happening recently that I wasn't able to put in my written report.
Thank you. If anyone wanted to access the April 16th hearing, it will be webcast. How would we access that?
Yeah, the April 16th hearing. Yeah, that will, well, I think as Jason mentioned, they're still working through all of the parameters on how they're going to put these remote hearings together. But yes, I have spoke with the chief of staff to Atkins, and it is their intent that the public will have access to this. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Any questions for David?
I had one for David. So I was working on some housing bills, not related to homelessness, and I was told that anything that required a budget, had a budget impact, would not be heard this year.
Yes. So Lorena Gonzalez had sent out a letter in which she, Senator, in which she laid that, I believe it's Senator Delgado, in which she laid that out, stating that if you had a budget impact and was not related to COVID, that those bills would be held in her committee. I think we'll see how that goes. I think we'll know more after they get a chance to look back at the receipts, because I think that's a hard tide to keep back when you have worthy programs. But yes, ma'am, that is what Assemblywoman Gonzalez sent out in her letter to the body.
Okay, thank you for verifying that.
You got it.
Thank you. Any other questions for David?
Madam Chair, if I could,
Yes.
I just want to point out the obvious to our consultants, and that is that, the discussion on the GHG is nothing but a smokescreen. And from my perspective, with all the recent data that we're seeing on the racial disparity and the impacts on mortality from COVID-19 and the programs that we're looking at, we need to be pushing on the fact that we don't care where the funds come from. They just have to come from it. They can't just simply point to, well, GHG's declining, GHG's reduced. The general fund should be opened up for these programs when they're looking at the deaths that are being caused and the compounding of COVID-19 and the air quality aspects. So we really want to push hard on that. I know we've got calls, and I know you're all working to schedule calls with some of the members, but I don't want to let this GHG limitation stop us.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We're seeing that across the state, that there's two things going on. The air quality looks better because nobody's working or going anywhere. But at the same time, we're seeing these very severe impacts on the and racial disparity in what's happening on the health front with racial groups and the COVID deaths. So there's a real actual impact that we're seeing from poor air quality as we face respiratory diseases, and this isn't going to be the first one. We expect more viruses like this to be coming our way in the future. So we can't let up and not do anything. We have to be very vigilant and keep fighting the fight to clean the air. Okay, any other, that's my comment. That was my opinion. As Governor Cuomo says, these are the facts and this is my opinion. So that was my opinion on this. Any other questions here for David before we move on to Will Gonzalez? Yes, Dr. Burke.
Is Mr. Quintana still on the line?
I believe he is.
I am, sir.
Okay. Well, what I'm really concerned about is that when the Surgeon General of the United States stands up and says, I'm a product of the inadequacies of the medical system to Black people in the United States of America, Ms. Gonzalez needs to understand that her constituency is not far behind that, if not ahead of that. So somebody needs to explain to her that even though the numbers or the spotlight is being focused on Black people right now, it's Hispanic people are going to come into their own in a second. So if she really wants to do something in the state of California for all people, she needs to help those people in the budgetary process.
Understood.
Thank you for those comments.
Thank you, sir.
We're obviously going to see that racial disparity across not just our Black brothers, but also Latino, Hispanic, and others as well. Supervisor Perez, do you have a question? No?
Oh, hello.
Hello. Yes,
Hello.
Supervisor Perez.
Well taken, Dr. Burke. And obviously, as a member of Latino Caucus, Assemblywoman Gonzalez, I think that if maybe we were to put together a letter, some sort of campaign, whether it's a phone calling or a letter, I think would be stronger to demonstrate the importance of dealing with the disparities as folks of color, not only for African American, but just, folks of color overall. I think that would be helpful. I think she'll get the message. I think ultimately at the end of the day, what's going on right now is everything is falling behind COVID-19. COVID-19 is at the front of everything that's going on right now at the state level, as far as at the county level, for example, right now. I'm trying to hang on and trying to listen in on what's going on here with AQMD, but honestly, the COVID-19 issue is at the forefront. And so it's not a bad idea for us to remind her and others that it's important that we don't forget about air quality issues as well moving forward. And so I think she would appreciate that. At least I would hope so.
In keeping with that, Supervisor Perez, wonder if we had the district drafted a letter over your signature with all the rest of the board members who agree with that, signing underneath you, and send it to her.
That sounds good to me.
I'm for that. How about that, Wayne? Let's get that done.
We'll have that today.
And then we can see Mr. Senator Delgado on it as well.
I was going to say, I did serve in the caucus with her, for those 4 months, but I'm happy to talk to her too. If you haven't read that article, it's very compelling. It's striking that this virus, really impacts the 6-1-17 communities very starkly. And in California in particular, the majority of the cases are Latino patients. So in California, the data skews more towards Latino. So if we target it as a people of color issue, I think she will be impacted by that. But I agree that at least through June, we're probably not going to see much traction, but we should not give up. I think this is actually our chance to frame the issue under COVID-19 and get more attention to it than we have in the past.
I think that's a good idea. Of course, I'll be willing to sign on to the letter, and if the staff would let all our board members know this is in the works and ask who would like to sign on would be a good idea. Any other remarks or questions here under this item with David? Okay, I don't see any further questions. We have another report on the state legislation side, and that's from California Advisors and Will Gonzalez. Will, good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Everybody can hear me okay?
Yes.
Very briefly, just an update to our report is just how the legislature is handling the thousands of bills that are still pending. The short answer is it's fluid. Obviously, we've heard from the previous reports that dates continue to move, and when the session comes back is still in question. A couple of points, though. The individual legislators have started pulling some highly controversial bills. I would say not very many, but we are seeing members feel that there's some bills that just aren't appropriate given the circumstances and are voluntarily pulling bills, but still thousands of bills are pending. And the policy committees, what we've seen in both houses, are starting to send basically their own criteria of what they think should move forward and not. And there doesn't seem to be consistency across across committees. But what we're seeing is obviously we want to prioritize bills that are COVID-19 related, homelessness, economic stimulus related, but there hasn't been a blanket notice put out for what bills are and aren't going to move, aside from Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez suggesting she would make some decisions on her own in appropriations. So we are seeing policy committees send out criteria to members, encouraging, I think, a reduction in bill loads, but continue to see, thousands of bills still pending. What that means for AQMD, I think, given the uncertainty, there are a number of bills that are of concern to us. We should all be working under the assumption that these bills will be heard when the legislature potentially returns on May 4th. So I know there's bills related to emergency power shutoffs and backup generators. We will continue to oppose those bills, get letters out, scheduling calls with committees and with members to express AQMD's opposition to these bills. And worst case scenario, these bills never get heard, and so be it. But I think we need to assume that a lot of the bills that are of concern to the district right now will at some point move forward. And we need to keep, AQMD's communication on those bills, both bills that we, oppose and support. So I think that's it for now. We operate as if the legislature will come back May 4th, and we continue to, as Jason pointed out, do what we do and lobby, but we don't do it face to face. And so we're, putting in the calls and the letters and the text messages constantly.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Will. There was, I heard this, I guess, from our staff, that there is a movement to limit legislators to only 5 bills for the year. Could you comment on that?
Happy to. The rumors are flying like crazy. That was probably last week's biggest rumor. It was in the Senate. Members were amongst chiefs of staff were discussing a possibility that a legislative limit would be imposed. That has since gone quiet. Again, there has been no blanket policy, and committees so far have been left to kind of come up with their own criteria. But I wouldn't be surprised if we do have a blanket leadership policy established at some point. But right now it's fluid, and we have to assume every bill out there, we're going to be facing come May or whenever we do come back.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that update. Any questions for Will? on his report? Not seeing any. Thank you. And I'll move to public comment on the update on the state legislative issues. Derek, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. Anyone, any public comment on this item?
Again, if you want to have public comment, please raise your hand, or if you're on the phone, press *9. We don't
Not
see.
seeing anyone. Ron, anybody?
No public comment.
No public comment. Okay, thank you. Next item on our agenda is an update on the legislation that the district has been pursuing for a voter district authorization for clean air. And Derek, I believe you'll have the update on that. Go ahead, please.
Yes, ma'am. So as noted by the consultants in Sacramento, legislation has pretty much come to a halt. We did, as I think I mentioned previously, we did have a spot bill that was put across the table by Assemblymember Ian Calderon. He wasn't sure he was going to actually carry the bill for us. He did it as a favor, and it's thanks to David for getting the member to do that. But subsequent to that, there was actually discussion going on with his chief of staff that actually Ian may be interested in learning more about the bill and possibly introducing it. But as was mentioned previously, the legislature went on recess on March 16th, and the deadline to have it, the actual language, the introduction of the actual bill itself to Rules Committee was on March 18th. So we're still going to move forward on it, but as I think it was Jason mentioned, or maybe it was Will, talked about the special session or extraordinary session. We may have to do it during that time, but as we get more information, we will update the committee. That's all I have.
Thank you, Derek. Any questions of Derek on this?
I have a question.
Supervisor Perez, go ahead.
All right, thank you. I do think that eventually we're going to get to that point where we will have an extraordinary session. I remember back in 2008, 2009, during the recession, we actually went through that process quite a bit. And so I have a feeling that's going to happen this go around. With that said, I also do think that bills might be limited to folks. And so the more that we can do right now in educating Assemblymember Calderon so that this becomes a priority bill for him, the better. And although COVID-19 is at the forefront for everybody, nonetheless, though, perhaps maybe next week or the following week, it'd be a good idea to set up at least some sort of conference call with him, Zoom meeting with him, to begin that process, to get a feel for where he may possibly end up with this piece of legislation. And so I just want to put that out there. The earlier we get to him, the better. At the same time, educate him in hopes that he prioritizes this bill as one of his top three, so that it doesn't get held in appropriations, and maybe we can move it forward during an extraordinary session. Just want to put that out there.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Perez, especially for your perspective as a former member of the legislature. That's very helpful. Any other comments or questions about?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Dr. Burke.
I think at some point, we got to do an analysis of effort and cost versus potential reward. Because I think the lights are growing dimmer and dimmer on this bill. And we're still spending a lot of time and effort and capital on pushing it now. Seems like to me we're trying to push cooked spaghetti up a hill. So, it's I think an analysis on the potential success of this effort.
Thank you. for those comments. I think that's something staff can take a look at and consider, the likelihoods of success with this approach. So, we're running up against a wall on a lot of it. Yes, Senator Delgado.
No, I would just support your comments. Assemblymember Calderon is facing his last bit of term. So if he doesn't choose this as his priority, I guess his stepmom might take it up, but we'll know within the next few months if this light, is gonna end for this particular session.
I think it's particularly difficult in this year with the COVID-19 pandemic. That's been the focus, and if we could use that as an opportunity to move this forward, we should. But obviously, there's two sides on that coin. That everyone is concerned with the economic downturn and the health impacts of the virus, and but there may be a way to use this as an opportunity as well.
Right.
Okay. Any other comments? And I will ask anybody. No, seeing no other comments, I will ask for public comment on this item.
And if there's any public comment, please press the raise your hand button in the right-hand portion under participants. And if you're on the phone, please press *9. And we don't see any raised hands, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other business to come before the committee this morning? Seeing none, we will open it up for public comment in general for items that are not on the agenda. Does anyone wish to make public comment? No, I'm not seeing anything from here.
No.
So with that, this meeting comes to an end and we will adjourn until our next meeting date on May 8th. And thank you all for attending this morning.
Thank you.
Ron, this is Jill. I have a technical question. Do we need to hang up and then call back in for the next meeting? Or if we just stay on for the 10 o'clock meeting, we're good?
Just stay on for the 10 o'clock meeting. We're going to change the title slide and we'll start in 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is it a possibility, Ron, that we, in this meeting, we have the committee members' picture